Hey guys, Sean Michael with the Sean Michael Simulation here. It is Mavic Monday. Today we're going to talk about drones. A lot of you have come to me and asked, what type of drone should you purchase to document your travels? Maybe it's your RV travels, maybe it's just travels in your backyard with your family, and you want to pick up a drone because you've seen so much wonderful drone footage shot by your fellow citizens out there on the internet. So today we're going to look at three Mavics, and these are all current generation Mavic drones by DJI. And specifically, I want to talk a lot about the Mavic Air 2. So this drone just came out a couple of months ago. I did an unboxing here on my channel, and I've over the course of the past few weeks gotten the opportunity to spend a lot more time flying the Mavic Air 2. And I want to compare the ownership experience against the tiny but mighty Mavic Mini, which I took to Asia earlier this year, and the Mavic 2 series. I have the Mavic 2 Zoom. Some of you may have or be interested in the Mavic 2 Pro. They use the same body, and the difference in those two models is the camera. One, the Pro model, has a larger sensor but no zoom range. The Zoom, which I personally love, has a 2x zoom on it, and it's a fantastic drone. But what about the Mavic Air? Why would you buy the Mavic Air? Well, all of these Mavics follow the same basic design philosophy, foldable arms. So you can fold their arms down along with the props flush to the body, so they have a very small footprint. It makes them wonderful travel drones. And you can see the Mavic Air body is right in the middle of, from a design standpoint, size and weight standpoint, right in the middle of the Mavic Mini and the Mavic 2 series. But it's a substantial drone, whereas the Mavic Mini is so small and lightweight that at 249 grams, you are free of some of the registration requirements with the really tiny Mavic Mini. With this larger drone, it's just a more substantial unit, and a lot of countries are going to require you to register it if you're going to fly it. So that's just something to be aware of. So I wanted to take a look, a little bit of footage. We'll talk briefly about what makes the Mavic Air 2 such a special drone. A lot of people are touting the Mavic Air 2 as the perfect drone for the average user. Well, one of the big marquee features of this new drone is the new sensor. It uses a 1/2-inch sensor. Bottom line is, the larger the sensor size, the better image quality you're going to get. And in addition to a new sensor, it's got a new processing unit inside, so new processor. So it really just has a beautiful image quality. And I can confirm that after doing a good bit of flying with the Mavic Air 2. Definitely has a fantastic image quality that would stack up well against the larger Mavic 2 series. This Mavic 2 Zoom has a 1/2.3-inch sensor. The bottom line is, I believe the Air 2 actually has a larger sensor than the Mavic 2 Zoom. So you're getting a great sensor, a great processing unit, and a 34-minute flight time. Battery life is just wonderful with the Mavic Air 2. And because it has that great new processor, it's just smarter. The AI is better. It has a tracking mode that's much better. So like, if you want the drone to automatically track and follow you when you're traveling around, this is probably your best bet in the Mavic range right now, because it has kind of the latest and greatest intelligence built into it. Another great advantage of the Mavic Air 2 that I want to point out over a lot of the previous Mavics is the controller. We've got a new controller design that I personally really like. they did away with the older design in which you had to dock your cell phone from beneath. With this new Mavic Air 2 controller, the antenna is built into this housing where you slide your phone. So the phone actually connects to the top of the controller, and it's a little bit larger controller, but it feels much more sturdy and comfortable in the hands. It's got a great battery life as controllers go, and the range of the Mavic Air 2 is incredible. I've gotten spectacular results flying this drone out pretty far from me, and I haven't really had any issues with range. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same for the Mavic Mini series. So the Mavic Air 2 has got a lot going for it. There are a lot of features built in to the Mavic Air 2 that, for example, are not built into the Mavic Mini. If you're looking at getting your first drone, you're probably going to look pretty closely at the little Mavic Mini, and I recommend that you should. I love this drone, but this drone is kind of stripped down to the bare essentials. It's very small, very lightweight, but there's no built-in collision detection sensors, and DJI is kind of stripped down the software too. I think this drone probably is capable of active tracking. In other words, the hardware could do it, but DJI has not unlocked it. One thing you're going to discover if you start shopping DJI drones, their marketing department is very clever. And you've got three pieces of gear here. They all look very similar, but as you move up the model range, you're just going to unlock more features and functionality. So many of you might be thinking, why would I buy the mid-range Mavic Air 2 instead of the higher up the food chain Mavic 2 series like the Mavic Zoom and the Mavic 2 Pro? Well, what happens in technology, every year, everything gets better, doesn't it? The sensors improve, the internal processors improve, the battery life and flight time improves. So just the software gets better. And so sometimes as they release new drones, a less expensive drone might be capable of doing a little bit more. And that is the case here with regard to certain features. With the Mavic Air 2, for example, you can shoot 48 megapixel still images. Now, I've shot several of these, and I personally was not blown away by the results, but yes, they are 48 megapixel, so they're really high resolution images. And that's something I couldn't do with the larger Mavic series. That's something I can't do with my Phantom 4 Pro. And battery life, 34-minute battery life for the Mavic Air 2 versus, I believe, 31 minutes for the Mavic 2 series, the more expensive drone. So this little Mavic Air 2 really packs a lot into a small, compact unit. And it does, importantly, have collision detection. So if you are a beginner, and if you have the budget, and if you're worried about the prospect of colliding your drone into something, and frankly, you probably should be, then the Mavic Air 2 has that going for it as well. It's got forward and rear collision detection. Unfortunately, DJI did not build in the side collision detection sensors into the Mavic Air 2. And that's a little bit frustrating to me because I enjoy using the quick shot modes that DJI provides. And they do provide a lot of quick shot modes. But in those modes, sometimes the drone is automatically flying to the side. And with the more expensive Mavics, those side collision detection sensors could detect potential collisions before they happen, tree branches, telephone poles, and so forth. So I want to show you a little bit of footage that I've shot with the Mavic Air 2 and give you an idea maybe of what to expect. And, a lot of these are just fairly random selection of shots. Here we go. This is down in Florida on the bay, kind of in the 38 area, and it was a barge one of those huge barges that goes up and down the waterways down there. Well, I flew my Mavic 2 out to this barge, and the barge is probably about 1.5 to 2 miles from the home point where I took the drone off. So the performance of the drone from a range standpoint has been absolutely incredible. In fact, I haven't flown this thing out of range yet, and that's something I can't say pretty much for any of my other drones. So overall, I think the Mavic Air 2 really does have a lot going for it. With regards to whether you would choose the Mavic Air 2 over the Pro model or over the Mini, part of it boils down to budget, and part of it boils down to how much you value portability, because there is a significant difference in size and weight from the little Mini moving up the food chain to the Mavic Air 2. And I think if I was preparing to go overseas, I would still take a long, hard look at the Mavic Mini, because the Mavic Mini is so small, so lightweight, so portable, and really takes such beautiful footage. Even though the footage is 2.7K, it's pretty incredible. Here's a question from a loyal viewer, Christy Michael. I see her pop up on my feed quite frequently, who asks, why don't they offer more face sticker options for the drones? That would make it easier for me to tell them apart. That is a very good point, Christy. I think maybe the Mini is still winning the face sticker competition between these drones. But I'll show you the face sticker that we have for the Mavic Air 2. Not a bad choice either. Got to give your drones a little bit of personality. So Johnny Lightning says, hey, Sean, just saw this, but I got to go. I have someone coming to my house in half an hour. Wish me luck. I may be going full-time yet this year. So Johnny's talking about going full-time with RV travel. That's a really hot thing to do these days. A lot of people are doing it. And, you know, there are a lot of advantages to full-time RV travel. You know, the beauty of an RV is if you don't like where you're located, it's got wheels, and you can just roll on down the highway. A lot of people who own RVs chase 72 degrees and will take their RV to whatever part of the country might be featuring the best weather. And if you follow our other channel, Long Long Honeymoon, you may be seeing us do that in the very near future. We're going to go out in search of some cool weather. But right now, we're in the heat of the summer in the South. So like if you look here, you can see this is footage coming off the Mavic Air. Mavic Air is a relatively quiet drone. You know, something that DJI has done over the years, they have modified the pitch of the sound coming off these drone props. The very first generation of drones were highly annoying devices. I think we can all admit and agree now, because the pitch of those drones was so high. They've lowered the pitch, and somehow that lowers the annoyance factor. So here you're seeing some footage. There's a couple of workers on that barge out there in the bay in Florida, and I don't think they even noticed the drone. Maybe they did, but it's kind of a cool up close look at this barge as it steams along the river. So I'm going to jump around and show you some more footage. Here's some footage of the Mavic Air on the beach. From my experience flying the drone, I can verify that the battery life is indeed excellent. They claim 34 minutes. It certainly feels that way. It's plenty of battery life. So I actually have 2 batteries with my Mavic Air 2, and that gives me 1 hour and 10 minutes of flight time. In the real world, it's pretty rare that I would be flying a drone for longer than 1 hour at a time. And I carry around some lithium power stations. I can always recharge my drone batteries whenever I need to. So I found that to be just enough. And you can see here some water in the Gulf of Mexico. It was a little bit green that day. It looks like there's a little bit of seaweed. But one comment I would make about the Mavic Air 2, the picture quality out of the box is very good. However, it is very JPEG-like in terms of its color rendition. It has pretty high saturation to the colors. A lot of people are going to like that, but it's a little bit more consumerish. So if you are looking to shoot sort of Cinelog type cinematography with a flat color grade and later just grade the colors yourself, then you may not be as happy with these colors out of the box coming out of the Mavic Air 2. Now, there is a cinematic color setting that you can put your Mavic Air 2 into. That might help with that if you want to do the grading on your own. Let's see, I've got a couple of other comments. Let's see. Galen says, Sean, you may have covered this, but the resolution of the Mini versus the Mavic Air 2 enough to make a difference on YouTube. I'm near your home base. I'm going to go full-time in April. Thank you, Galen, for the comment and the excellent question. If you look at the Mavic Mini, again, this is $399, and it shoots 2.7K resolution, 30 frames per second. So 2.7K is higher than 1080p HD, but it's less than 4K. The Mavic Air 2 shoots 4K, 60 frames per second. And that's really a marquee feature of this drone. My Mavic Zoom drone does not shoot 4K 60. And I don't believe the Mavic 2 Pro shoots 4K 60 either. Previously, 4K 60 frames per second had been reserved for the Phantom 4 Pro. I also have a Phantom 4 Pro. So Galen's question specifically is whether the 2.7K is that different than 4K on YouTube. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, and I'm going to say, no, it's not. I don't think most people can view this content on YouTube the way it is typically presented and tell much of a difference. And if you don't believe me, go watch my Mavic Mini review that is on this channel, the Sean Michael Simulation. All of that drone content on my Mavic Mini review was shot with the Mavic Mini at 2.7K. I rendered the video at 4K because I shot my A-roll in Bangkok, Thailand, just standing out on the street in 4K. The drone footage is pretty spectacular. Now it's 30 frames per second. With the Mavic Air, you could shoot 60 frames per second. So if you're just creating B-roll, sometimes it's helpful to have those extra frames to work with because you can easily do slow motion. You know, you can take 60 frames per second, cut the speed in half, and still have smooth slow motion in a 30 frames per second timeline. And I'm sorry if I'm confusing some of you guys with some of this arcane video editing terminology, but the bottom line is, to Galen's question, I think the Mavic Mini image quality is perfectly acceptable for YouTube. In fact, most people on YouTube still render videos to 1080p or full, what they call full HD, which is 1920 by 1080 pixels. The Mavic Mini shoots a larger image than that, shoots the 2.7K image. So most people are actually going to take that Mavic Mini image and shrink it down to 1080p. Now, the Mavic Air does shoot 4K, which is 4 times the content of full HD or 1080p. Again, I apologize for all this arcane terminology, but most people are taking that 4K image and they're downscaling to 1080p. So why would you want the 4K? Well, better is better, and it does give you the ability to crop. And if you do render the 4K and view it on a 4K television or 4K monitor, then yeah, it looks pretty spectacular. But most consumers simply are not doing that right now. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you this image. So like all this was shot again with the Mavic Air 2. You can see the color I think is pretty beautiful, but it's pretty heavily saturated. Some of you would probably want to work with a different type of color spectrum. But Something I also want to point out about the Mavic Air 2, even though it does shoot 4K 60p, it shoots in a newer codec. It's a H.265. And my editing software did not want to ingest the content I was shooting with this little drone. So I ended up transcoding that content using some free software called Handbrake. But if you have never transcoded files, it's just a slow process. It's not that it's that hard, but it adds one additional step to the workflow. So if I can avoid transcoding files, that's what I want to do. That's just something to be aware of with the Mavic Air 2. Your computer may or may not be able to handle those 4K 60p files. So whatever drone you're interested in purchasing, I would recommend you seek out some sample files. You can find them. There's a lot of places on the internet where you could download some actual sample files, download them to your computer and pull them into your editing software and see if they would work for you or if you're going to have trouble editing them. Because there's no point in capturing these huge 4K 60p files if your computer can't handle them and can't edit them. I've got a workhorse computer. It's one that I actually built myself a few months ago using some of the latest components that are available. I have a 16-core AMD processor, Radeon graphics card. I built a beast of a computer, and it still has had some issues processing these Mavic Air 2 files. And it has to do with, I just don't have that particular codec installed on my computer yet, and I'm going to have to problem solve that. Mike and Shauna say the Mavic is a bit outside my cash zone right now. Do you have an idea for a beginner drone that I can crash and not cry over the loss? Mike, that is an excellent question. I think my advice to you, because most of my experience is with DJI drones, might be to get an older model DJI drone. And I'm talking about like a Phantom 3 or even a first generation Phantom 4, if you can find one, or the first generation Mavic Pro. In other words, go back in time maybe 3 years, and you're still going to get an outstanding piece of technology that has probably been heavily discounted because these drones get updated every year. Yes, they do get better, but I found that with drones, once they got to the Phantom 3 series, in my opinion, they started to radically advance. I bought the first generation Phantom. Like, I've been flying drones from DJI pretty much since they've been producing them. And when we went from the first generation to the third generation, it was like going from a Model T Ford to an S-Class Mercedes or something like that. There was a huge leap in technology. So I think we're at a point now where if you go back and you buy a drone that's, say, 3 or 4 years old from DJI, you're still getting a pretty substantial and capable piece of equipment. Now, the Phantom 4 introduced collision detection. I think you're wise to be concerned about crashing your drone. I will probably do a video with some advice of how to fly a drone as a beginner. I do have a video here on my channel right now with some tips to avoid crashing your drone. Collision detection will help a lot. I won't deny that. But I think those older drones are so capable. They're such ruggedly built pieces of equipment. They were almost built to withstand a little bit of crashing, a little bit of damage. And I know from experience that I treated my Phantom 3 pretty harshly. So that's probably where I would look. I may look into some more inexpensive drones. This little Mavic Mini for $400, you're getting a lot of drone. You're really getting a very powerful aerial cinematography tool. And I can only suspect if you've got a used Mavic Mini, you might be getting down the $200 to $300 range. That's getting to be pretty cheap for what you're actually getting. So I appreciate the question, Mike and Shauna. I will look into that and see if I can find a more inexpensive drone that would work for you. Zachary says, I bought a Mavic Mini recently and I love it. I'm a little sheepish about flying when there's other people around. Any tips on how to fly a drone in a way that's not too disruptive to other people? That is an excellent question, Zachary. I usually do a read of the area, try to spot where the people are, and first of all, go away to a more private place to launch the drone. You know, what I've discovered is that once these drones are 50 to 100 feet in the air, most people don't pay them any mind and don't notice them. It's the taking off and it's the landing that attracts a lot of attention. If there are children around, if there are dogs around, you need to be especially careful about where you take off. Kids see them, they're a magnet for children, which is understandable. If I was a kid, I would probably be chasing after drones as well. But they're going to be very curious and want to see what you're doing. The other tip I would have is think about noise, not just the noise of your drone, but the noise of other vehicles, the noise of anything that might be happening in an area. If you take your drone off in a relatively private location that is also kind of noisy, it can be a best case scenario because other noise can mask the noise of your drone. So for example, when we were in Mandalay, Myanmar earlier this year, I wanted to fly my drone up and get a few video clips of a beautiful Buddhist temple, just white spires throughout this large Buddhist temple in Myanmar. There was nothing preventing me from doing that, but I did not choose to go into the middle of the temple, take off my drone, and disrupt everybody around me. I went about 2 blocks away from the temple into a relatively noisy area, but it was a side street, and it was noisy because occasionally traffic would zip up and down through the air, like motorbikes and that sort of thing. And whenever there was a particularly noisy motorbike or something going past, that was the perfect opportunity to take off the drone, take it up, and once it's about 100 feet in the air, you're not going to have to worry about attracting too much attention. And it's especially true with these smaller units. I mean, the Mavic Mini, once you've got that thing 100 feet or 200 feet in the air, pretty much nobody's going to notice it, I don't think. And especially if you're in any kind of urban environment and there's other noise around, like even at the beach, as you'll see here, just the sound of the waves at the beach is such that most people don't really notice it. And those who do notice it typically like it. So here I am landing the Mavic Air again. All this video content was shot with the Mavic Air 2. So I just wanted to show you a couple of these clips. There's one other series of clips I'd like to show you, and it has to do with the active tracking of the Mavic Air 2. The tracking of the Mavic Air 2 is improved. I think it's improved even over the Mavic 2 Pro. In other words, the artificial intelligence is just a lot smarter. And so like we're active tracking here in the city of Birmingham. Let's see. Here we go. And it does a really good job. Now, of course, at this point, I have it above any other buildings, above the tree line, but below 400 feet. And it's tracking our Airstream and truck as we drive through the city of Birmingham, which is a pretty cool shot. So like that is something that is significantly improved in the Mavic Air 2. If you want to have a drone follow you around and take shots of you as you ride a bike or you're on a surfboard or whatever, then Mavic Air 2 is a good choice. Hey, Todd, there's Todd from Utah tuning in. I appreciate you tuning in. Todd says predatory birds may notice it in the air. That is certainly true. A few years ago, we were in Tennessee, camping at Duval in the Smokies campground. Great little privately owned campground run by really wonderful people near the Smoky Mountain National Park. And they had an eagle that was nesting very near their campground. And I did do some drone shots of the campground, but every time I took off that drone, I had an eye on the eagle's nest to make sure I did not in any way provoke the eagle. I did have a situation recently in Florida in which a number of birds were following my drone and were kind of diving at it. And these weren't the large raptor type of birds. These were smaller swallows, but there was a pretty large group of them that were pretty aggressively charging at the drone and backing off. And I just retreated with my drone. So far, my drones have not been attacked by birds of prey, but it is true that that is a risk. Galen says, Sean, Nancy and I have watched most all of your RV videos, and I've always been curious about your tracking along the beach. Are you flying most of the time or doing tracking? The truth is, when we are traveling with our RV, and if I'm wanting to get a shot of our RV in motion, typically I'm doing the flying. I will let my wife do the towing of our RV rig. Christy has a lot of experience towing, so I know I'm always in very good hands if Christy is towing our Airstream. I will do the flying because as good as artificial intelligence is, it's still nowhere nearly as good as a human being and a real human pilot making those decisions. So like if you've seen some of our videos about the Florida Keys, you may have seen our RV being followed as we towed along that highway going down into the Keys. I was personally flying the drone at that time. The active tracking is good in small amounts for less ambitious tracking assignments. In other words, if I was jumping on a bike and I wanted the drone to follow me around, riding my bike around a trail, active tracking is pretty good for that. But for following an RV at 30 or 40 miles an hour, I don't think you're going to get what you want with the active tracking. It still pretty easily gets confused. So if the subject ducks behind a building or some trees or what have you, the drone loses the track and it just stops in midair. And I've had that happen so many times that I pretty much just stopped using active tracking for that kind of purpose. So here you see some footage that you guys may find interesting. This was an interesting RV camping situation for us, where we actually camped in downtown Birmingham to document the installation of new signage. Tallest building in Birmingham, which previously had been the Wells Fargo Tower, is now the Shipt Tower. If you're familiar with Shipt, Shipt is a company that does some shopping for you. Basically, where they send out their shoppers, you tell them what you want them to purchase, and they'll like go to your favorite store, get your favorite items, and deliver it to your door. So that's what Shipt is. So you're seeing some footage here from that experience when we were camping downtown to document this experience. And it's really pretty incredible to see these guys work on the top of this tall tower. I was going to see if I have any after shots, but it's really a pretty incredible experience. And here you can sort of get an idea for the height of the tower. So, just to sum up some of this discussion with regard to these different Mavics that are available, they're all great. And I think if you are a newcomer to drones, I think you're going to be satisfied with the image quality for any of these drones. It kind of goes without saying that the top of the line range, like the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic 2 Zoom, are fantastic drones. They're probably the ones that I will reach for first. But with that said, I looked at my records. I purchased my Mavic 2 Zoom in late summer 2018. So this drone has got about 2 years of life on it. Never had a problem with it. It's been great, but it's probably about time for DJI to update this model line. So I suspect there will be a Mavic 3 coming soon. So if you're in the market for a drone now, I would probably recommend you hold off if you're really interested in this top of the line range, because I do think the Mavic 3 is waiting in the wings. With that said, I don't think you can go wrong with any of these choices. The Mavic Air 2 is kind of a perfect mid-range drone that includes so many features that even higher up in the food chain does not include, like the 4K 60p, the 48 megapixel prints, the 34-minute battery life. It's just a fantastic overall drone. If this is your first drone, then you're truly spoiled because it's an incredible imaging tool. But for those of you whose budget will only go to the Mavic Mini, buy the Mavic Mini without hesitation or shame. I love the Mavic Mini, and I think if I was loading up a backpack right now to go off on some international journey, the Mini very well might be the one that makes the cut because it's so much lighter than the Mavic Air, and because I've been so happy with the overall image quality from the Mini. You know, there are a few things that I've documented with the Mini that I don't like, and I'm not even talking about the lack of collision detection. I'm talking about the software. I would love to see DJI put out some firmware updates. Let us purchase better firmware for the Mini, unlock the full potential of that hardware, because I think the Mini is still just a fantastic option. If that's all your budget will afford, you'll still be very, very happy with the Mini, assuming, of course, you don't crash it. Sorry, guys, I'm going to wrap up this little live stream, what I was calling Mavic Monday. I appreciate your tuning in. Again, on this channel, I want to start doing more live streaming. I want to share more information with you about some different types of travel. So we're probably going to be doing some cool videos in the very near future, talking about some international travels and talking more about drones. So I appreciate your tuning in. Until next time, I'm Sean. This has been a special Mavic Monday episode of this little live stream. Until next time, I will see you on the internets.